right, welcome back to the Butter Notes podcast with three guys who have no business listening to music, much less talking about it. This is your co-host Jim. I'm here with Jake and Tone, and we're going to do episode 2 of our Frank Zappa deep dive today. This is going to cover the years between Hot Rats and Just Another Band from L.A.
Kind of a polarizing
dissolution of the original Mothers. This is Tone talking. Dissolution of the original Mothers up to Frank's accident is the span we're talking about.
Yep, that's right.
Covering.
That's a good way to contextualize it. I hadn't thought of the accident being at the end of this one.
Yeah, it's like a pretty major moment in the biography. So, like,
that's why we end up getting Waka Jawaka and Grand Wazoo. It's because Frank couldn't stand and play.
Yeah, so for
fuck it, might as well do some orchestral music.
For people totally not me who don't know about the accident, you should maybe give some context there. Like I said, not me who doesn't know about it, but other people who might not know about it.
So during a concert with Flo and Eddie, he got pushed off a stage, and he fell a pretty far away. I don't remember the exact amount, but he fell onto concrete, and I think the band thought he was dead, it was really serious. But he recovered, and I think a lot of people thought he would never walk again. But he recovered and was totally okay after a reasonable amount of time. But there's a really hard change in the music when you go through the catalog in between Just Another Band from LA and then Waka Jawaka comes after, and it's it's night and day, and that's why.
Yeah, I mean that changes Frank for sure. One interesting little change, actually, and this might be better for the next episode, but fuck it. Frank's voice drops a half an octave after the fall. So after he recovers, you notice a distinct change in the quality of his voice.
That is true.
It's more
the pitch of his speaking voice comes.
And he does more vocals after that too. Maybe he liked that more. Maybe he liked his new voice more. I don't know.
I remember reading in a biography that someone was talking about how his voice dropped, and I think it was Gail, and she was which Frank was totally stoked about that his voice dropped.
Yeah, he definitely
from the accident or
just
for some other reason.
He already had a pretty deep voice, but I mean the classic Frank voice from after from Grand Wazoo and on. Yeah. But yeah, so this one starts out, this crop will start out with Hot Rats in '69, which seems to be the album most people have heard.
Most famous and most acclaimed by far.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And with good reason. I mean, Jesus, Hot Rats is a fucking slapper, man. Total classic. Jake, had you heard this one before?
Oh, yeah. This is one of the first ones I've heard.
Yeah?
This is one of my favorites, for sure. I've spun this quite a few times.
Yeah, this was one of the ones I got into the earliest. I think this was probably the point when listening through the discography for the first time where I was like, oh, okay, I get it now. Because when you're 16, the early Mothers shit is pretty hard to really get interested in. Except maybe we're only in it for the money, but Hot Rats you can pick up on pretty quick. I mean, they launch in with Peaches, which is Peaches on Regalia, one of the most beautiful pieces in the whole catalog. And then the rest of it's just a bunch of blues jamming, basically, except for Little Umbrellas and It Must Be a Candle.
Mr. Green Jeans is also, or Son of Mr. Green Jeans is also pretty much, I mean, there are some jammy parts, but it's definitely composed.
Yeah.
And
you're right. That's
Son of Mr. Green Jeans, if I had to pick a favorite on here, that would probably be it, actually. Even though Peaches and Willie the Pimp are the ones that are discussed the most.
Willie the Pimp.
But I mean, all 6 of these cuts are classic.
Oh my god, yeah.
We get Beefheart on this too, right? He's doing the vocals on Willie.
Yeah, just on Willie the Pimp.
Which is the only track with vocals. Yeah, I don't know, what am I supposed to say about Hot Rats? It's Hot Rats.
Seriously. Yeah, seriously. I mean, we could just go track by track. I mean, Peaches is the most approachable probably on the album. It's very whimsical, very pleasant sounding.
The really airy guitar part, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, airy was the word I was going to use. Yep.
Yeah. The kind of Eastern sound. I don't know how to describe it, but it's kind of that one guitar part that just has you kind of soaring. It's really nice. Very pleasant. Yeah. And then Willie's like real dirty. Like that's a dirty fucking blues song.
Yeah, it's a dirty track, man.
And then of course we get the live rendition of it later, which his soloing, and especially when he's like improvising on it, he can do some really cool shit on that track. Much more pared down.
Well, I mean, all the solos on here are improv for sure.
Right.
Can we talk about
all these are improv studio takes?
Sugarcane Harris.
Got to talk about Sugarcane Harris, dude. Fucking
what a legend! Like he didn't.
Oh my God.
Sugarcane Harris doesn't
Gumbo
have
variations?
didn't have that many recordings. Like he didn't. He's like kind of like an obscure, almost lost session guy from the late '60s, who rips out like, I don't know, like one of my favorite solos on any instrument on any album ever. On that violin solo on Gumbo, like. I can listen to that. I can listen to that fucking violin solo. That's some of my favorite. That's one of my favorite things in the world, and has been since I was like 15.
I love the way they build it into the violin solo too.
Oh, the tension.
Like the way they bring the dynamic down, and they're building up with the snare, and just hammering that fucking G into your brain. And then Sugarcane Harris comes
it's beautiful.
Blowing in with that violin solo. Holy shit. Yeah, I love that stuff, man.
So we had talked about...
go ahead. Oh, go ahead, Jake.
I was going to say, we talked about this before. I suppose... I want to say this is such a wide and varied discography, and so if I was just thinking in terms of if I wanted to introduce someone to Zappa. I got into Zappa with Apostrophe. I think at your suggestion, James, I think you mentioned to start with that one. I think this is probably also a good entry point into the discography, though. Like, I don't think you could go wrong with starting with this one. It is the most acclaimed, like Anthony said, but that doesn't always necessarily mean it's like the best entry point. I think Apostrophe is obviously a good place to start too, but I don't think you can go wrong here.
I tell people Apostrophe an overnight sensation because that's what Dweezil tells people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I hear that.
Well, you're not getting any...
Makes sense. There's something for everybody on Apostrophe and overnight sensation.
Yeah.
You're not really getting the lyrics on Hot Rats. You're not really getting the comedy. Even on Willie the Pimp, like, it's basically unintelligible. It's basically just Beefheart. Beefheart being like a... Beefheart, the way that Beefheart performs on Willie the Pimp is not really how he performs on his actual solo material. Like, Beefheart is like as much of a poet and writer as he is a musician. He's a painter too, obviously. $20 bill in my hand, but like the verbal content of the music is very, very important for Beefheart's own music, but it's really not on Willie. It's basically just him being like a dirty, grizzled blues singer. So
he's not just like howling and shrieking like on what's that fucking song on Trout Mask Replica?
Oh God,
Pena.
I think it's
Pena. Pena's horrifying.
Yeah. Yeah, it's Pena.
So yeah, you're not really getting the comedy on Hot Rats. It's like even the instrumental parts aren't really like wacky. Really, it's not like those like. It's not really those like comically complex runs that especially get started in the mid '70s. Like,
yep.
Like, I don't know. Like this is just like the sweet spot for Frank in every single way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually got to see Dweezil do all of Hot Rats in 2020, February 2020. Good times.
I missed that, unfortunately.
Yeah, God, I mean, dude, so one thing that Dweezil talked about a lot in the promo for that tour was, like, how much effort they had to put into getting the sounds right. Because Dweezil is so meticulous about getting the sounds that you would have heard, like, in the studio that actually show up on the album. Like, his guitar rig he's got is just insane. He's got so many sounds available to him all the time. And it really was like listening to the album the way these guys played it. It was ridiculous. It was like listening back to the recording. It was so crazy good.
Yeah, I bet it was. When they did the Roxy tour, it was the same way. When we saw them, I saw that with you, right, Jim?
Yeah, Charlottesville,
yeah.
2013.
Yeah, shit.
Yeah, that was awesome too. But I want to give a shout out tier 2 to It Was a Camel. I think it's I I don't know. It doesn't get talked about as much, but fucking "It Was a Camel" is beautiful.
It
man.
must be a
It's
camel.
a great closer.
Is
Yeah.
the title right?
Is that not what I said? What I
You
said?
said it was a camel.
Oh yeah, "It Must Be a Camel." Yeah. Got to talk about "It Must Be a Camel," man. Like there's so much Frank on that tune. It's definitely the wackiest of all the 6 songs on this album. I think by far, like the wackiest in terms of the musical composition.
Yeah, it's pretty atonal and jumpy and like angular in the way that Frank often is.
Exactly.
But yeah, he's definitely doing that the most on "It Must Be a Camel." "Little Umbrellas" too is a song I slept on for a while because I listened to like the shitty digital remix of this for the longest time, and then I got the LP that Zappa Records put out, which is the original mix, and like the fucking like the bass is just gone on that digital mix. Like the album is still amazing, but like it's basically the album without the bass, which is bullshit. And then I finally like actually heard the album in reality when I got the LP, and "Little Umbrellas" is night and day when you get the bass.
Hot Rats in general is night and day. I think you can hear it too in the drums on "Peaches." Dude, that's such a serious shortcoming we experienced growing up listening to this stuff for the first time, because we had all those fucking digital remasters of all the early Mother stuff. Like, I think of it specifically for Hot Rats. We're only in it for the money.
I hear Frank did some questionable things
else?
with remasters. Or that's a common
Quite a
opinion
bit.
that people have.
Yeah, I think he should have let him be for the most part.
Yeah.
He so yeah, it was like 2009 that we got into all this stuff for the first time, and that was like really the only versions that were easily available digitally, unless you found vinyl, like uploads of the vinyl, which you could have found, but would have been maybe less easy to find. And then like the proper mixes have all been put out digitally and on CD in the years since, but in 2009 that's what you had available digitally, and that's what we heard. And Hot Rats was one of my favorite albums of all time with that shitty mix, and then with it turns from a 10 out of 10 to an 11 out of 10 when you finally get the actual mix.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. The drums just sound real.
I don't know if I have that
context. The drums on those digital mixes don't sound... Jacob, are you listening to it on Spotify?
Yes.
You're hearing the good shit.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would imagine it's the good shit that's on Spotify.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Maybe I'm glad I never had to go through that. I don't know. I mean, I'd like to know for the context. Just a curiosity I'd like to see. But
yeah, it's interesting, I guess. I don't know. That like where you really hear it, in my opinion, is the drums, and then like Anthony said, the low end. Like there's just, the bass just isn't there.
The bass is not there on that fucking remaster. I don't know what he was thinking, honestly. Like it's Frank Zappa. Like it was like a musical titan, and he fucked up a lot of this stuff. Like I don't know what he was thinking.
Yeah, I don't know what the thought process was there. I've never read about it.
I think he was really intrigued and fascinated by the technology, and maybe went too far. It would be my hypothesis.
That would also be my hypothesis.
Were these like the 87 remixes?
Yes.
That sounds about right, yeah.
Okay, yeah, they're on YouTube. I'm going to check them out just for the curiosity, just to see. But
it's basically the same, but with no fucking bass and way quieter drums. So there's not really any reason to check it out, honestly.
The drums almost sound programmed on that stuff, dude. Like, it's crazy. They really just don't sound like drums.
Huh.
Yeah, Frank just went ham.
I have to know now, like you guys have said it.
Listen to the drum fill in the intro of Peaches on the remix versus the original mix you hear on Spotify.
All right.
It's wild.
Yeah, maybe it's good I've been shielded from that.
But yeah, Hot Rats, a fucking absolute classic, man. It's no surprise this is so acclaimed compared to the rest of his stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I don't know, it's like the perfect jazz rock album. It might be the best jazz rock album ever. Very well might be. It's Hot Rats, you know. Pretty much like, even if you're like even mildly a music nerd, you know Hot Rats, so we don't really have to talk about it that much. But
it is the #1 rated jazz rock album on Rate Your Music.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think that's right, yeah.
Yeah, it's Hot Rats. Naked City.
Yeah. There's nothing. Yeah, there's nothing controversial about this or like interesting. There's nothing interesting left to say about Hot Rats. I don't feel like you just listen to it.
Naked City does not belong.
Yeah, what the fuck is that doing there?
What the fuck is that doing there? That is a mistake.
Yeah, but I don't know. I guess it feels weird that we don't have more to say about Hot Rats. But it's like I don't know. You can describe what the band is doing, but it's not really going to do it justice.
We've talked about this before.
You know?
I think it's hardest to talk about the stuff that we love the most.
That's probably right.
Yeah,
we've talked about this before. Yeah, we talked about that with Close to the Edge, with Ghost Reveries.
Yeah, my other thing is just like, it's such a widely like known album. I mean, let's be real. If anyone ever finds us and listens to this, there's people who probably already have a taste for this kind of stuff, and they probably already know Hot Rats. And I just don't know. I can't come up with anything new and interesting to say about the album other than just gush about it. Like that's really where I'm at with it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know.
The flute solo in Peaches is utterly beautiful. It's like
magnificent.
It's like magnificent and like gorgeous in like a very tonal way, in a way that's like unusual in the Zappa catalog. We didn't write stuff like that very often.
Green Jeans shows up on a previous record, right? The
theme. So this is Son of Mr. Green Jeans. You hear Mr. Green Jeans on Uncle Meat.
Same main theme.
Uncle Meat, right? It's much. Yeah, it's much
exactly.
slower too. Yeah,
and it's much slower, and it has words.
That's right. That was a cool
vegetable.
That was a cool. I mean, I was listening to these out of order, of course, but that was a cool like Easter egg, I guess.
Yeah.
But
well, there's tons of that shit all over this catalog, man. Repurposed, rearranged music shows up all over this catalog.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's move on to Burnt Weenie Sandwich.
Here we go.
So this and Weasels are both basically like comps. They're considered albums, and they are albums. They're not considered comps, but they are kind of comps of like various recordings that the Mothers made. Largely, well, Burnt Weenie Sandwich is pretty much, I think, all studio stuff, and Weasels is like pretty much all live.
Yep, that's the basic idea.
But that's important to remember because probably we're going to talk about how Burnt Weenie Sandwich is inconsistent, but it's kind of definitionally so because it's kind of a com. So it's important to keep in mind.
I think Frank described the title as like it's a reference to the way the album's structured or something like that. Because you get the doo-wop at the beginning and the end, and then there's all this weird shit in the middle.
So the album rock channel that my dad used to love to listen to on Staten Island back in the 70s was WPLJ, and they named it after this song, which is
did they really?
Which is a cover of some obscure old doo-wop song that nobody gives a shit about, but Frank loved and covered it.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I don't know about you guys, but white port and lemon juice sounds like a fucking disgusting cocktail.
Yeah, that's like one of those classic like 1950s foods that nobody would ever eat anymore. You ever see those memes of like 1950s cookbooks where it's like all this shit in Jello? It's like shrimp and Jello and shit. The white port and lemon juice sounds kind of falls into that category.
That fits in, absolutely.
That song is so stupid. That song is so stupid. I was listening. I'm like, this is.
I really like it though. I've always liked it.
Yeah,
it's funny.
I like that.
It has good humor about. I don't know.
Dude, I love Valerie, man. Valerie's fucking great.
Yeah,
Valerie's
bookended by those two doo-wop covers.
Yeah. My buddy today said that about this album. We were talking about this album, and he was like, I said something about it being inconsistent, and like I don't remember as much from it. And he goes, "Now you say that, my two favorite songs are the doo-wop tracks. I really don't remember much else of what happens, like unless I go back and listen to it." That's kind of how he felt about it.
Dude, not Little House I Used to Live In. I mean, that's the highlight, like by far.
Oh yeah, no, I mentioned that, and he's like, "No, that is a great track." But yeah, he was just kind of. I think he just meant like in general. It's like the things that stand out to him were just that there's two doo-wop tracks and a bunch of weird shit in the middle.
This is one I've mostly ignored over the years. Like I know it, but it's not one I've listened to a whole bunch. I've listened to Little House a whole lot, but the rest of it I haven't listened to a ton. It's interesting. Yeah. I mean, like there's a lot of like the orchestral motifs sort of getting fleshed out for the first time, like Holiday in Berlin, which has two like, I guess there's 2 sections of Holiday in Berlin on here. There's like intro to Holiday in Berlin and then the full-blown Holiday in Berlin. And that motif you see all over the place. That's basically the sealed tuna sandwich thing from 200 Motels. It's also Bogus Pomp on the London Symphony Orchestra stuff. What else? Do we see any of these other orchestral pieces show up anywhere else?
It wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, I'm sure.
A lot of them do kind of feel like I love Holiday in Berlin, but like a lot of the album does kind of feel like drafts, with the exception of Little House I Used to Live in.
Theme from Burnt Weenie Sandwich is like, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like only 45 seconds, I think, and it's got like a weird like daycare classical feel to it. I don't know how to describe it. Sounds like a music box, kind of like.
Dude, it's weird. Some of the stuff sounds like almost out of tune.
Yeah.
Draft is the right word for it. I think some of this stuff might be out of tune. I don't know if that was intentional or if it was just something where they had to deal with recording or what.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really cool album though. Like I do agree that it's not Burnt Weenie Sandwich is not one that I like. It's not like necessarily one of my go-to like Frank Zappa albums, but like it's always awesome to listen to. Like I mean, I guess it is inconsistent, but like every track here I like a lot. Like I'd probably put it somewhere around the middle if I were to like rank the entire catalog, but I mean, it's a pretty weird, cool, kind of unique album in the catalog.
I totally agree. And dude, Little House I Used to Live in, I mean, that thing has a beard, man. That's a serious piece of music, especially that piano introduction.
It's one of my favorite in his discography for sure.
It's definitely one of his most ambitious works in general.
Yeah.
I was a little disappointed by this record just because ever since I started listening to Frank, maybe back in 2016 or so, this album had been staring me in the face. Just the name of the album and then the album cover just kind of like enticing. But like I was just like, I need to check this out, and I never did. I was expecting to be good, and then it's pretty highly acclaimed. At least it seems that way. A lot of people dig it.
I wouldn't call it highly acclaimed. I don't hear people talk about it too often. Burnt Weenie Sandwich.
What's the Rate Your Music rating for it? It's pretty high, isn't it?
3.7. Yeah, it's pretty high.
That's pretty high.
I'm not surprised. I mean, it's really good.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Holiday in Berlin's cool. I love Little House. It's an excellent piece. One of my favorites for sure. Yeah, it's bolded. People seem to generally hold it in high regard, but it just didn't do a lot for me. It was just too inconsistent and kind of. I felt like it was just kind of patched together. It didn't have a good, consistent feel, and a lot of the tracks just fell flat for me.
I don't find it inconsistent, really. Like, I don't know, inconsistent's not the right word.
It doesn't flow very much, anyway. But that's kind of the nature of what it is, as I mentioned. But it definitely doesn't, like, maybe like it's not all that coherent or cohesive. But it also wasn't really written to be. But I don't know, like, that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially when it's music that's very strange and atonal like this. Like, this is probably this album as a whole is probably some of his more difficult work. So, I don't know if the fact that it's a little jarring and jagged is bad necessarily, considering what most of the music is like.
Bad.
And then
I just don't derive as much enjoyment out of it, I guess, for those reasons.
Yeah, I mean, this is like more akin to, I don't know, like avant progressive stuff that would get started a few years later, like Henry Cow, Universe Zero, all that stuff. Like,
I like those bands quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, that stuff is better than this. But like Frank had a lot to do with the development of that kind of avant rock, and you can see that on Burnt Weenie Sandwich. So yeah, I don't know. The more I talk about it, the more I like it. Honestly, this is what I needs to be in my regular rotation more often.
The whole middle section of the album I think you're right, Anthony, is sort of like paving the way for bands like Henry Cow and Universe Zero. It's that like, it's like a rock instrumentation being used as a chamber music ensemble,
and it's very
which we see a lot of
and
with
atonal.
Frank in general. Yeah, because he's kind of doing that on Hot Rats too, but it's a lot more approachable. This is much more challenging.
What's that kind of like 12-note serialism like Schoenberg? I think Frank had a high opinion of Schoenberg. At least
Frank had a high opinion of most of the big names in 20th century classical, and that's all over this album.
Yeah.
It's all over a lot of his material.
Yeah, it is. I mean,
the more classical
for Stravinsky
stuff I hear a lot of Schoenberg, and then of course like Stravinsky and stuff, and Bernstein. I hear a lot of that. Yeah.
Yeah, the two
Gershwin.
big ones are Stravinsky and Varese.
Yeah.
Those are his two biggest influences for
Definitely
sure.
hear Stravinsky and a lot of more classically oriented stuff.
Yeah, I got to put this one in my rotation more often too. I don't listen to this one enough.
Oh, I'm gonna give it more shots for sure. If I don't like something, I want to listen to it more to see if I'm missing something. But yeah, just first go at it. Not my favorite. One of my least favorite I've heard from Frank. Hopefully that'll change though. I'm open to that.
Moving on to what is kind of universally considered his most difficult album, but also one of my favorites.
This one was fun. I like this one.
I mean, but yes, we're talking about Weasels Rip My Flesh.
The album was great.
I mean, this one comes right out with it too, man. Did You Get Any Anya is one of the hardest parts of the whole album.
Dude, that rhythm at the beginning is so fucking cool. That rhythm is so fucking cool. It's like that feedback, kind of like punchy. I don't even know I don't even know what's making that noise, but it's so fucking cool. I just kept playing that over and over again.
Yeah, this is Frank, instead of worshipping avant-garde classical composers of the 20th century, it's him kind of worshipping avant-garde jazz performers. I always like kind of hear this album as like Frank's take on like free jazz, which shows up occasionally on some Frank albums throughout the catalog, but not a whole lot. Most of it shows up on here. It's basically like a comp of like the craziest improvs that they did live. And it's fucking awesome. I love Weasels. Especially the brutal parts. I do too. Because, I mean, I love free jazz, though. Free jazz is like one of my favorite kinds of music, so it stands to reason. This was probably the first this definitely was the first, I don't know if you want to call it a free jazz album, but there was a lot of that on here. If you call it a free jazz album, it's definitely the first one I ever heard. And I wasn't ready for it when I was 16.
No. Like Eric Dolphy Memorial Barbecue is not for the faint of heart.
Eric Dolphy is definitely a big influence on this whole album.
Yep.
Although it's more improvisational than Eric Dolphy. Eric Dolphy's material was like, for the most, like, well, Out to Lunch is pretty much entirely composed. And yeah, when you listen to Out to Lunch, you can definitely hear. I'm sure Frank probably like specifically talked about how he loves Out to Lunch at some point, but you can hear it in the music, especially the late '60s stuff like this, the weirder late '60s stuff.
Yeah, I mean, so the free jazz thing is all over this one. I think we've talked about this in a previous episode. I don't remember where, but I found this. I found some podcast somewhere where these two guys were talking about Frank's relationship with jazz. I wish I could find that. I wonder if that's available somewhere still. I found it in college. But basically, they were talking about this sort of like push and pull with Frank and jazz. Like, you can tell Frank has a big appreciation for jazz music, but he also rips on it. I mean, kind of as with everything else. I don't find this stuff to be like satirical of jazz music, really.
Like when you listen to Out to Lunch by Eric Dolphy, like that's the kind of jazz that I imagine Frank loved the most. It's like incredibly complicated, very strange, mostly composed. It's almost like semi-chamber music performed on jazz instruments. So it's unsurprising that there's a tribute to Dolphy on here. But I don't know, it's cool to One interesting thing about this album is that on the free jazz moments, there's not like a ton of Frank's guitar. It's like mostly the other members of the band going nuts. And I don't know, it would have been pretty interesting to hear. I don't know if you think about like some like experimental guitar players from the 60s and 70s, like Sonny Sherrock or Fred Frith or Derek Bailey, like those kind of like crazy free improv guitarists. It would have been kind of interesting to hear Frank try to play like that, but he doesn't really on this album, even though this would have been the album where he would do that, but he never really does.
That would be interesting. I have a hard time imagining it, really.
I can't really imagine it either.
Like Frank's guitar playing, I mean, that's a whole episode in of itself. Like, in a lot of ways, you know, Frank didn't really hold himself to the same standard he held his hired musicians to. Like, you know, you don't hear Frank improv over the approximate changes, like Michael Brecker does in Zappa New York. You don't hear. I don't know. Frank's solos are usually these big, expansive, like almost one or two chord solos, where he's able to just run wild and like sort of freely compose in real time. But he's not like a jazz guitarist in any sense.
I always thought it was
weird,
like
he's not playing the game of trying to like play with the changes.
I always thought it was strange, like the sort of structure of the backing band, and then Frank being much more free. I mean, it's his stuff, his project, but like I just thought
he's the band leader.
Like you said when you said not holding himself to the same standard. I mean, there's that moment in that live performance of Cosmic Debris with George Duke and JLP, where they do some pretty cool improvisational soloing and stuff like that. But you get the sense that in general the backing band is kind of I don't know, held to a like rigid kind of structure, so that Frank's able to kind of, because the centerpiece of that performance was Frank's guitar solo at the very end, and it's much less structured. It's kind of all over the place. I don't know how that would have worked in the context of jazz, which can be pretty wild and free, but it's also like pretty regulated too. That kind of jazz guitar playing. I don't know.
Yeah, like
for what it's worth,
but when you listen, like some of like the really crazy tracks on here, like Get a Little and Eric Dolphy Barbecue and Orange County Lumber Truck, like if you listen to like some free jazz that has guitar, like if you listen to My Gifts by Farrah Sanders, which has Sonny Sherrock is on that, and it does some crazy shit on the guitar on there. It's just interesting to me that we're not really getting that on the free jazz Zappa album, even though it's a Zappa album. I know, I guess you could speculate as to why, and I think Jim offered a pretty good theory. But it's not like a critique of the album. Just one of my favorites, but it is something that I always think about.
Is the possibility he wasn't comfortable playing in that style? I don't know if we'd ever know, but...
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, I'm sure he could have if he wanted to.
But I just felt like I couldn't do that. I didn't feel like I could do this well. I don't see Frank as someone who's not going to put something out. He's like experimental.
Frank
but I don't
the
feel like
guitarist is... Yeah. Frank the guitarist is not Frank the composer. Right. They're different sides of him.
For sure.
Frank the guitarist is like basically a blues guitarist, honestly. Frank the guitarist is basically a blues guitarist. Obviously, you know, he expands on the on the basics, but it's not. He's
right.
not a. He's a different kind of virtuoso. He's not like a Steve Vai.
Or Metheny. Like Metheny is like one of those players who could, one of those jazz guitarists who could play anything. Like he has incredibly melodic, like smooth jazz playing, and then he has like insane noise free jazz albums too. But Frank isn't really like. Frank always considered himself more of a composer than an instrumentalist, and And so, like, saying he's not one of those guitarists who could do anything almost sounds like I'm, like, insulting Frank, but I'm not, because, like, that's not really what he considered himself to be primarily.
Yep. I think that's right. Like, if you know Frank, then you understand what that means.
When he brought on musicians, is really picky about it for a reason, too. I guess he knew what their role was in the band and playing, so I don't know.
He wanted the rocking teenage combo, man.
Yeah, I just imagine he had a particular sound in mind. Maybe it just didn't occur to him to play guitar like that. Like, he got the sound he wanted out of the musicians he had, and he played accompaniments with it that he was happy with. It could just be as simple as that, really.
It took him like about 10 years into his career to form a perfect band, which comes with the next group of albums we'll talk about after this episode. That's the perfect Frank Zappa band. So it's not like he like instantaneously knew how to do it. And you also have to form connections as well in order to get certain kinds of people.
Right. I just mean at that time he may have like felt that he had what he needed. You know what I mean?
I don't think he ever felt like he had what he needed.
Maybe. I mean,
that's why he switched to the synclavier.
I love the synclavier stuff.
That's why he switched to the synclavier in the 80s. Was he was like, I want to compose without the restrictions of human performers. So
yeah, it would have been interesting to hear what
some
kind
of that sentiment.
Would have been interesting to hear what kind of music Frank would have made with like 21st century technology.
Yeah, fucking yeah.
I love Jazz from Hell. I think that's one of his best in my opinion, but it's basically just computer Frank.
Weasels being the opposite of computer Frank.
Yes, very much.
Yeah, but then so this album too. We gotta mention it's not all free jazz too. Like you know, there's a lot of really like there's some really pretty stuff on here. I think of Toes of the Short Forest. I think of Orange County Lumber Truck. Like those are some sort of classic, like whimsical, pretty Frank melodies that actually really come into a good light on here. That Orange County Lumber Truck, you get a really good sense of the harmonies in here, because we see that melody come through again in the next band. Like you hear Son of Orange County on Roxy and Elsewhere is a lot of the same stuff, but I think some of the harmonies get buried a little bit. So it's fun hearing that and really getting to enjoy the harmonies that are written into it. It's a really, really pretty little piece.
And then, of course, and then we also get to Kill Your Mama.
Yes, studio I was just about to talk about that.
It's the first Frank I ever heard without realizing it back in the day. It was a cover version, but yeah, it's the first Frank I ever heard. I was like 6 or 7.
That's a classic.
Yeah.
That is a classic, man. And it has a rare Frank Zappa acoustic solo,
which is weird because it's such like kind of like a relative, and when I say relatively simple, I do just mean relatively simple. It's not like in the grand scheme of music I wouldn't call it simple, but it's a relatively simple, just like kind of blues rocker tune. Even the lyrics aren't anything like crazy, or the lyrics are funny, but just not in like a Frank Zappa way. They're just kind of funny. So it's weird that it has that one weird one-off of that acoustic solo.
It's definitely not simple. I mean, Steve Vai was leading it. That's why I heard it. Steve Vai was basically covering it at the G3 concert. So it's not like simple or anything, but for that format, it makes sense why they'd pick that one out of. I mean, if they were gonna pick any album or song from this album for that format, it would have to be that one.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of like every fucking like boomer dad guitarist has to know my guitar wants to kill your mom.
Dude, that's how I found it. My dad had the DVD and he was like, you gotta hear this, and he was playing it and some dude with like a beanie comes on and starts like singing. He's loved it, yeah. That's exactly right.
Yeah, I love that tune.
It's really good.
It's a classic. Alright, and after Weasels we make a departure into the Flo and Eddie years. Flo and Eddie being Mark Volman and what's the other guy's name? Howard Kalin. Yeah, Mark Volman and Howard Kalin, who were the two of the singers from the Turtles. You've all heard "Happy Together," and you'll actually hear it a couple albums from now, played by the Mothers. But so this is the official mark of the end of the original Mothers. We get Chunga's Revenge. And it's it's a pretty marked difference. You can tell it's a new band. Interestingly enough, we actually get George Duke on here too. Mm-hmm. This is the first George Duke record with Frank.
Yeah, Chunga's Revenge is a weird one in the discography. It has the title track is one of the finest Frank Zappa guitar. It's basically just a 7-minute guitar solo, and it's one of his finest solos. It's so weird. Like, there are moments of that solo that are like he's doing shit with the electric guitar that like was it almost like I want to say like it almost sounds like a synthesizer. He's just doing crazy stuff with the guitar in that title track. Like that solo blows my mind every time.
Yeah, that's a classic. I mean, you can kind of hear the evolution of Frank's tone over the years. Like, you can tell when you hear the later Frank. Like, listen to Frank on the '88 tour on Broadway the Hard Way or Make a Jazz Noise. You can hear that basically all of the guitar sounds you hear leading up to that point were trying to get at what he gets in '88. Like, it's exactly the sound he's been going for the whole time. I think there's a direct line from like the Hungry Freaks Daddy solo through to something like Chunga's Revenge into the fusion years leading up to the 80s.
Yeah. Chunga's Revenge, I would definitely say. Chunga's Revenge is definitely a more like avant-garde guitar solo than the majority of Frank's solos. It's definitely one of his weirdest solos. Maybe not all of it, but there are definitely parts of it that are just like pretty challenging work, honestly. Like kind of like room clearing stuff, some of those moments of that solo, and I mean that in like a really good way. So that cut is amazing, but I don't like this is another album that feels like very sort of I don't want to say haphazard, but I don't think it is a compilation, but it kind of flows like a compilation. I don't get a lot of rhyme or reason to the structure of Chunga's Revenge and never really have.
I feel that way about the Flo and Eddie stuff in general.
Me too. I mean, I don't. Yeah. The Flo and Eddie stuff is fairly weak, with some highlights. That's my opinion. I'm pretty sure it's Jim's opinion for the most part, and it's probably most people's opinion about it.
I think I definitely like it more than you do, but again, I'm a super fan, so I like all the little details, all the eyebrows, and there's no shortage of that stuff in the Flo and Eddie years. But it is probably my least favorite era. It's my least favorite era.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say that it's worthless, but yeah, it's the weakest era of Frank Zappa.
I like it more than the first era, I would say. It's like a kind of humor and playfulness to it that's interesting. I loved this album. I thought it was awesome. I thought the guitar play was amazing.
We're probably going to get into some debate about like the nature of satire here, which is inevitable, but most of the humor doesn't land with the Flo and Eddie stuff. Maybe it did at the time, but Frank was like very obsessed with being very topical during the Flo and Eddie period. I don't know why. Maybe Jim has some insight into why. But he was like very, very obsessed with being like very specifically topical. Like there's a fucking joke song on Just Another Band from LA about like a clothing store in Los Angeles. Yeah. It's like no one gives a fuck about that anymore. And like it probably only would have been like a small amount of people in LA in the early 70s who gave a fuck anyway. So like I don't know, Frank, like I don't know why he was like that so much during this period, but like it just doesn't really translate anymore. A lot of it doesn't.
A lot of the content was like him talking about encounters with groupies at like their like sexual encounters with them, and some of the stuff, especially on the next album, I was laughing my ass off.
And a lot of it is also kind of insular. Like a lot of it is like satire about being on tour, which I don't know. Like that can only really go so far because it's like it's going to be a limited amount of people who can even relate to what's being satirized.
So I think we're going to get to more of that here when we move on to the next record. But before we do that, is there anything else we want to say about Chunga's?
Yeah.
Because there's some awesome stuff on here. Like think we got to talk about "Tell Me You Love Me." That's a classic tune.
"Tell Me You Love Me" is great. Transylvania
we hear
Boogie's cool.
We hear that all over the place.
Nice
Transylvania Boogie's a great solo too.
Rhythm track, yeah. I love the clap. That's a cool
Charlene
little percussion piece. I read that Frank was the only person on that track. It seems like it was an outtake that they threw in. I thought that was a cool little bit.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
The Nancy and Mary music is great too.
I read after listening to it, I had read that some of this music was pulled from the Hot Rats sessions, at least 1 or 2 tracks, and then a couple of them were like there was a band that was playing the Hot Rats stuff that they worked on this material. I thought this was much like still in that vein, like jazzier, bluesier, and there's a lot of guitar playing, which I love Frank's guitar, like the style. I felt there was a lot more of that on here. I agree, it's not as cohesive. There's no like. I agree with Anthony. I don't think it's like a rhyme or reason for the way it's structured, but I thought all the tracks were enjoyable on their own. They're a really nice format. They're enjoyable. I didn't think too much of it. I don't think it was too challenging or anything like that. I thought it was just really straightforward and great instrumentation and musicianship. It's one of my favorites in the whole catalog, I would say.
It is. I mean, I am fond of Chunga's Revenge. It has its shortcomings, but I am definitely fond of it. It's by far the best album of the Flo and Eddie period. Maybe because Flo and Eddie don't have as much of a presence on it as what comes after. Charlena, I do think, is the best vocal piece that Frank wrote for this band. Like,
Rudy Wants to Buy You As a Drink is the only track on here that didn't land.
That track isn't very
part
good.
of the reason why I pulled it back, but that one, I think 20 Small Cigars was very,
his drink's pretty funny.
20 Small Cigars was awesome. It was like really bluesy. I think that might be the one that came from the Hot Rat sessions. I was fond of that one. I don't know. I just thought it was cool, like instrumentation.
It's like a transitional really album. He's like kind of between bands. He like kind of has a new band, but he didn't. But not everything on this album is really with that new band. Some of them are outtakes. It's just like it's not like a fully ironed and pressed release, despite the fact that some of the tracks are amazing. And I think like I don't know, that's sort of the downside sometimes of like being like basically like releasing at the pace that Frank did. So like if he maybe would have like ironed out the edges of this thing a little more, I think it would be a lot better. In my view, because like I don't know, Chunga's Revenge is an album that I think is really good, but it's like just like could have been great if just like a couple things would have been tweaked on it. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I don't think it's a masterpiece, but I hold it in really high regard.
I think that's right that it's transitional. I mean, this is a new era with the Flo and Eddie years. So that seems like a pretty good segue, actually. I'll give you guys my take on the Flo and Eddie years. But we'll move on and talk about the next one, which is a live album. This is Mothers at Fillmore East, June 1971, which I think is actually a couple of shows that got stitched together.
They just released the complete one of these. I was looking at the LP for it. It was like $60. It was like this quadruple. I think it was a triple album. I was tempted. I don't really care for this stuff that much, so I didn't buy it, but I was tempted.
I did actually listen to that. It's on Spotify. It's fun. I mean, it's like, you gotta really give a shit about Frank to want to go back and listen to all that stuff. Like,
most of that stuff got released on Playground Psychotics, so I think I have heard all of it. I just haven't heard it all in sequence.
Yes, that's right, because
with John Lennon.
Yeah, the famous John Lennon and Yoko
Yep.
accompaniment happened in these years, but we won't actually hear that until Playground Psychotics.
Later. Well, actually,
John
a lot
Lennon
of that
come
was
out in some of these shows. He played with them, right? Like the live shows, and Yoko too. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, that's what we mean. So John and Yoko came out and played. Yeah, they came out and played on one of these shows. They did a couple of songs.
Several of which were released on the John Lennon Yoko Ono album sometime in New York City. That was the first release for a lot of that stuff. And then a lot of it got released again on Playground Psychotics. And then Zappa Records just released the full show, which I guess would probably be the best way to hear it all, because before it was just being released in these weird like snippets. So I would have to I'm not like crazy about this stuff, but I would definitely listen to the whole concert.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. So what is Frank doing with the Flo and Eddie band? I think this is like an exercise in like, playing with like a rock band. You know what I mean? More so than with the Mothers. The Mothers was more out there. With Flo and Eddie, he's more grounded. He's trying to write music within the rock band format, and he's got these two guys, these two kind of wacky, crazy guys, Volman and Kalen, and he's like, what can I do with this band? One thing that would be fun would be to like write some more like contemporary like rock hits, but obviously being Frank, he's going to try and satirize that whole style. So I think a lot of this stuff is trying to like is trying to poke fun at the big rock and pop acts of the time. I mean, that stuff's everywhere. I think ultimately what he's doing here is kind of trying to demystify like the rock band mystique. There's this like shroud of mystery behind so much of what was happening in rock music at the time with bands like Led Zeppelin or Deep Purple. There's a mystique to that stuff that I think Frank was interested in and kind of dispelling to some extent. And that's what I think he's up to with the Flo and Eddie years. You hear like with all the jokes about the groupies and the big hit, like they got to play the big hit. So I think he's just trying to play with these like really just like comedy pieces about.
Yeah, I was gonna say about this.
Yeah, it's like a comedy group.
That's basic.
It's like a novelty group.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's like
it
doing
felt like
these,
it felt like a sketch comedy show happening at a rock concert, which was really interesting.
Yeah.
I thought that was. Yeah. I don't know. I just thought that was really unique. I'd never really heard anything like that before. That was kind of impressive to me. The humor hit or miss for people maybe, but I just thought that format was really, really interesting. I was kind of impressed by that.
Yeah, and I like that stuff too. I mean, like I definitely laugh out loud at a lot of this stuff.
Buona Dick and
Buona Dick is hilarious.
What kind of girl do you think we are? And do you like my car?
Yeah, do you like my new car? Is hilarious. It's especially fun to watch that stuff live too, and it's weird. It's weird because, like you said, you've got Flo and Eddie like basically doing a comedy bit, but there's this weird like background musical accompaniment behind all of it. We'll hear that again on Just Another Band from LA, which basically all that's live. Actually, I think the whole thing is live. Is the whole thing live?
Yeah, it's a show from LA.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean that's I think what Frank is up to with this band, and there's going to be tons of that in 200 Motels. Like this is like a condensed snapshot of what he's doing with Flo and Eddie on Fillmore East. It's basically a comedy band.
Yeah, just
yeah,
the humor.
Some of it lands, but
I love
some
it.
of it lands, but the majority of it doesn't land. Maybe it did in the 70s. But
it landed on me on Tuesday. I was busting a gut listening to this stuff.
Yeah, so I think I know what you like, Anthony. You mean like the extra topical shit? Like there's tons of it in Billy the Mountain.
Well,
where it's
Just Another Band from LA. The humor on that whole album, Billy the Mountain included, pretty much none of it lands. There are funny moments on Fillmore East. Fillmore East does have some really good funny moments. Mudshark is great. Mudshark is like.
Yeah.
Mudshark is one of the few like totally memorable songs from this period. So Mudshark is a lot of fun.
Mudshark shows back up and Nanook rubs it, right? I'm pretty sure that the theme anyway.
Oh yeah,
the lyrical theme.
Yeah.
That's the first I'd heard of Mudshark. So
that was a Zappa motif for pretty much his whole career.
Easter eggs.
Yeah. But it's like. It's just like kind of like slightly lowbrow, wacky satire that didn't age very well. Flo and Eddie as performers are kind of annoying. They're kind of grating. They're not that fun to listen to. Which
they're trying to be. Yeah,
I get it's
though.
intentional.
Like, that's very intentional.
I get it's intentional, but it's not very good.
I don't know, man. I disagree. I disagree.
I like the Flo and Eddie stuff.
They get kind of old.
It
They
really
get kind of old
depends
on
it.
Not Just Another Band from LA. I will agree with you, the shtick, but when it's on, it's on. That's how I feel about it. I thought this played a lot better, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I don't know, that kind of slapstick stupid, them making stupid noises and saying dumb shit. I don't know, doing the girl voices and like Frank egging them on. I just thought the dynamic was cool. The crowd was obviously into it, which added a cool little wrinkle to it. Listening to it, added like a nice atmosphere to it. And I think the way you may have already said this earlier. Wasn't following all of it, but like I don't know if this was all like a continuous show. I think there were some abrupt shifts. So there's like, I think Latex Solar Beef plays, and then Willie the Pimp Part 1. It like seamlessly transitions into that. It's like a really cool transition. And then between Willie the Pimp Part 1 and 2, there's like an abrupt stop, and then it like starts back like in media res almost. It was kind of strange. I don't know that it was one continuous piece, but whatever it was, the way that they arranged this, I thought was a really, really cool in keeping with the live experience. Just hearing the crowd laugh was a nice little bit, because normally in live albums you just hear cheering and stuff. Hearing people yelling at Frank and Frank, messing with the hecklers was a cool little wrinkle. I just felt like it was like a stand-up comedy bit, like a sketch comedy. It was like almost like a stand-up comedy show, but it's Frank Zappa playing rock and blues music on stage. I just loved the format. I thought it was really cool. I wouldn't consider this to be one of my favorites, but I don't know. I thought it was really unique, and I appreciated it.
Yeah, I agree, Jake. I mean, I think this stuff's hilarious for the most part. There's definitely stuff that doesn't land, and I think that's mostly due. I mean, obviously, people have different senses of humor for one, but there is stuff that's like Anthony said earlier, that's very topical. Like, I mean, we're getting ahead of ourselves here, but like Eddie, Are You Kidding? On Just Another Band from LA, like it does, who's
gonna
lot
get
of the stuff in Billy the Mountain. Yeah,
Billy the Mountain.
A lot of the stuff.
Eddie, Are You Kidding? Who the fuck is gonna get it? There are 0 people.
Yeah.
Post I was gonna say 2022, but once it got to be like late 70s, and especially once it got to be like the 80s, 0 people fucking understood what that song was about. 0 people. No one now knows. You would have to look it up.
See, that's what I was going to say, though. There's something I like about that. It's like a time capsule. It's fun. It's fun to go back and look at this stuff, in retrospect. Obviously, like it doesn't connect with us the same way it would to somebody who knew what the fuck Eddie's clothing store was in the early 70s in Los Angeles, but I think that's fun. I don't know. And there's stuff like that in all over the early Mothers too, like when Frank's talking about the different clubs on the Sunset Strip on Absolutely Free in Plastic People. So there's always been that kind of topical thing. He does that in We're Only In It For The Money, talking about Ma to Go Stretch Elastic Pants and little things like that. So
I've been watching real quick. I've been watching Chappelle's show again, like going back, and like I one of the greatest comedians of all time, and that show is. But I was gonna say that show is a bit of a time capsule. There are some pretty topical things in there, and of course I lived through that, but I was a kid when a lot of that was happening. I have some sense of it because it happened during my lifetime, but I still think there's great like humorous content in that sort of thing, and going back and like seeing what people found funny in the early 2000s is really interesting. So I agree with James about it being a kind of time capsule, even if I don't get the reference. I mean, it could just be seen as an inside joke, and then I can just enjoy the music or not. That's kind of how I look at it.
So I have 2 points to make about it. One, satire is always going to be somewhat topical, but really great satire tends to penetrate something that's, for lack of a better word, universal. Maybe I'm skeptical of the idea that any social idea could be universal, but for lack of a better term, universal. So there's plenty of old satire that has held up. Like, we still fucking read like Jonathan Swift, despite the fact that he was satirizing shit in 18th century England. We still read that because it was because it holds up, because it's Voltaire. Like, we still read some Roman satire. So like, really good satire can transcend the specific topical thing that it's trying to lampoon. And a lot of this stuff from the Flo and Eddie period does not, and it didn't age well. A lot of Frank's satire did age well. Frank's satire on some of his previous stuff that we talked about on the early Mother stuff aged well and lands still. So that's really my critique, is that not necessarily that it's topical, but that it doesn't manage to penetrate anything beyond the very specific historical topic that it's, or pop cultural topic that it's mentioning. It doesn't do a very good job of transcending that, which is why I don't think it's very particularly great satire. But it is fun to kind of like get the little time capsule, which leads me to say that with any artist who was so incredibly prolific or is so prolific as Frank, inevitably there's going to be major work and there's going to be minor work. And there's value to the Flo and Eddie stuff that we've already talked about, but it's minor work within the context of Frank's whole career. Like we talked about Hot Rat's masterpiece, some of like the best music that has been recorded. And then we're talking about this and we're like, oh, it's fun to see the weird time capsule and look up the references. Like, yeah, that's fine, but it's not like, that's a different kind of enjoyment than listening to amazing music. And like, so inevitably it's gonna fall behind, and it's gonna be some of the minor work in his career. Because you're not getting like an ecstatic experience of art with this stuff. I mean, I don't think anyone is. But you do with a lot of Frank's music, but not really with this stuff.
There are moments on this, though, for sure. The Willie the Pimp solo is amazing. Sublime, even. Now, I'm much more impressed with the format of it. I think, like I said, I think it's really unique. I think in terms of, like, popular opinion, it's probably a minor work, like you said. But I don't think that diminishes the value of it. I quite enjoyed this. I think it's on par with other things. I think I probably rank it higher than some of like more acclaimed stuff. Like I'd probably have this over Uncle Meat, probably.
That's insane. That's crazy.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I just think this is.
I mean, your opinion is yours, but that's a very that's a bonkers opinion. But yeah, I mean, I'm not shitting on it, but also I think like because it's Frank Zappa, people tend to maybe give it more credit than they would otherwise.
I pretty much agree with you on this stuff, Anthony. Probably on this album in particular. I definitely think this is the minor work. This stuff just doesn't survive the same way something like Apostrophe or Overnight Sensation will.
Yeah, and it's okay to be funny. I'm not being critical of the fact that it's funny. Like stuff like Apostrophe and Overnight Sensation is really funny.
Yep.
But it's also timeless. There are topical references on those albums too, but they don't bog it down.
Yeah, and like I said, though, I mean, I just think they were after something completely different with this stuff. I think Frank, like pretty much like Jake was saying, was basically trying to tour like a comedy act fused with a rock band. And it was in many ways supposed to be like more self-parody than anything else. I think there's a difference between parody and satire, and a lot of this stuff is parody. And I think it was aware of its being parody rather than satire. Does that make sense?
So, yeah, no, it makes sense. So obviously probably Frank's fall sort of made him want to be, because he wrote he wrote a lot of like very serious and amazing music like right after that. Obviously that kind of like shook his idea of the kind of music he wanted to make. It would anybody. But what do you think made him want to make this stuff in the first place? Was he like disillusioned from the first Mothers breaking up, or what?
Truthfully,
speculation, inevitably.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, he wouldn't have done it if he didn't like it. I'm sure he was having a lot of fun with this stuff.
Yeah, and that communicates. That's what I mean. There's just a playfulness and lightness to it that really attracts me to it. I guess I think it's really cool.
End of the day, too, man. You gotta fucking eat. A lot of this stuff was. Frank looked at at rock music as a way to fund his composition habit, right? So he did these rock bands basically to fund his love of raw composition, and I think that's actually going to make a pretty good segue into 200 Motels. We get a real blend of the two on here, and we get, I think, some of the most straight ahead orchestral music that we hear in the Zappa discography. Probably more than Lumpy Gravy, just because Lumpy Gravy is so jagged. Whereas on 200 Motels we get the more straightforward orchestral music, like in the first track, the opener, the Direct from Hollywood or overture. What else? I mean, we get the sealed tuna sandwich suite throughout this whole thing, a lot of which we heard earlier in Holiday Holiday from Berlin on Burnt Weenie Sandwich. We get, I mean, God, there's tons of orchestral music on this stuff. Would You Like a Snack, which is the sung version of Holiday in Berlin. We get Redneck Eats, which is like a straight... Yeah, Redneck Eats is like a more in the Stravinsky, Varese camp, that side of Zappa's composition. And then we also get Strictly Gentile, which is one of my favorite of all the orchestral pieces. That was the... we actually played that when Haley and I got married. We played Strictly Gentile when we walked out.
200 Motels is a weird one in the catalog.
I love this thing. This is so cool. I love it.
It's goddamn bizarre, man. It's goddamn bizarre. Have you guys watched the movie, Anthony? I think you've watched the movie.
I have the DVD.
Yeah. I didn't Jake, have you watched the movie?
No, I didn't even know this was a soundtrack until after the second time I listened to it. I just was listening.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
So 200 Motels.
There was a movie to be a soundtrack to.
200 Motels, in my opinion, and in most people's opinion, you bros are going to act like I'm like crazy saying this isn't very good, but most people don't think it's very good. So
I don't think that's crazy at all. I think you have to be crazy to really like this stuff. You have to be deep into Frank. I mean, what I love about 200 Motels is all the eyebrows. I mean, that's sort of Frank's thing throughout the whole discography, is like just these little moments of fucking astounding beauty. And that you get in Sealed Tuna Sandwich or Strictly Gentile.
I described this. I said, dude, it's so cinematic, and then I was like, oh, it's a soundtrack, or sort of. I mean, the track listing's a little strange from what I understand, but at least compared to the movie. No, I wouldn't. I'd have never. So I listened to this completely blind. Like I didn't know anything about what people thought about this. It was on the list, and I brought it up on Spotify, and I queued it up, and it played after Fillmore, and was just listening to it. I was working on something. It was great background music. Again, this is another thing about satirization, like of, I guess in this case, like big overblown Hollywood movie soundtracks from like the 60s and 70s, and it kind of horseshoes back to that, where it just becomes this big kind of overblown Hollywood soundtrack. Like it was almost like Frank teamed up with Schoenberg to write the soundtrack to the like Mel Brooks, The Producers, or something like that. It was kind of in that vein, and I love that kind of music, especially something to work to. I just thought the pacing on this was really cool. Some of those like interludes, really interesting, great ideas. And sometimes in music, I think it's really cool when you introduce an idea and you're like, I wish they'd fleshed that out, and then you find yourself going, it's actually kind of cool that you didn't flesh that out. It like leaves you wanting more, so you come back to it. You can find
Frank does that constantly.
You can find sublimity in that like tiny little moment, and that's kind of how I felt listening to this thing. But I never suggest, because I don't really care if a bunch of people like it or don't like it, and two, like I didn't really know what people's opinions were about it, and so I never suggest that like if that's how most people feel. Yeah, if it's the common opinion, I'm not going to suggest that someone's crazy for not liking it, but that's why I liked it.
You're fine to have your opinion. That's fine. And I mean, 200 Motels is I mean, I appreciate it. I think it was a miss, but I definitely appreciate what he was trying to do. There are really great tracks. There are good classical tracks. There are good rock tracks. Magic Fingers is a really, really awesome blues rock track. Mystery Roach is also a really awesome blues rock track.
Mystery Roach.
There are huge slumps. This thing is a goddamn chore to listen to in its entirety. I've always felt that way. A lot of
the ones we listened to this week.
A lot of the excerpts of the movie drag, and I'm not interested. The movie itself isn't very good. I enjoy the movie for like the weird artifact that it is, but it's not very good.
That's how I feel about it too.
And the problems with the movie,
as a fucking super fan.
Yeah, the problems with the movie come across with the album.
Dude, the movie is like just this fucking like surreal, just this bizarro, surreal, fucking completely incoherent story. Like
it's not very competently made. It's not very competently made at all.
It's
funny watching
right?
Ringo in it.
Yeah.
And
Ringo and Keith Moon both show up in there. I mean, like, I don't know. And you get, again, like, the whole thing is kind of demystifying the big rock group, right, of the time. They're demystifying the touring experience, because, like, there's this mythology about, you know, the big rock bands, like, going on their big tours and destroying hotel rooms and partying their balls off for months at a time.
No, and touring fucking sucks. Every band you ever hear in an interview says we hate it. It's not fun. It's awful.
Yeah,
except for Portnoy.
Yeah, except for well, dude's a maniac.
Yeah, so I think that's what Frank is up to, basically with the Flo and Eddie years overall, but obviously especially with 200 Motels. And there's some other satire that gets sort of like shoehorned in here, like Centerville, this like sort of weirdly placed critique of American suburbia.
Lonesome Cowboy Bird.
Lonesome Cowboy Bird, yeah.
I don't really think it's that funny. I think it's kind of low-hanging fruit. Like, what exactly is he making fun of?
I think he's just having fun with a character.
Like,
I think he's mostly just having fun with a character.
It always seemed like low-hanging fruit to me. Like,
yeah,
it's like the kind of jokes I would have made when I was a kid, like a teenager.
I don't know. I lived around rednecks. I went to school with them. It's I don't know. It's kind of funny. It resonates with me because I get it. Like some of the stuff they do is funny. I don't know.
Well, so Lonesome Cowboy Bird. Who's he talking about? He's talking more about these like the old school California cowboy types. That honestly, I don't think a lot of people associate with that time. Like in the 60s and early 70s, there were still a lot of these old gold rush cowboy types that had moved to California in the early 20th century, late 19th and early 20th century.
California was an extremely Republican conservative state up until like the 2000s, honestly, which is an important thing to remember when you listen to Frank talk about LA.
Yes, especially in the especially the 80s too. But yeah, so like that's who he's talking about. It's sort of it's sort of like a stereotype that I don't think really exists anymore. But there was definitely this weird, like rich gold rush cowboy type in California, and Frank encountered a lot of these people when he was
Yosemite Sam.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. But like the Studio Z years, we talked about that in the first episode of the deep dive, where Frank is living in Cucamonga in the fucking middle of the desert, and they don't like him because he's making weird rock music in his studio.
Based. So
I think that's who he's making fun of on there. Ultimately, what I like about 200 Motels is the music. Like the movie aspect, I could mostly do without. It's like you said, Anthony, it's fun, like kind of as an artifact, but it's not great, like in and of itself.
Yeah, there are tracks on here that I revisit pretty regularly, but like the only time I ever listen to the whole album is if I'm like going through the Frank Zappa discography, which I've done probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 times throughout the past 10 years. Those are the only times where I really like listen to the whole thing straight through, and I always am not looking forward to it. This thing, if I go to put an album on, and I'm like, okay, like I'm only listening to this because I feel like I have to, like that's a sign that I don't like it, and that's usually how I feel. Like trying to listen to this whole fucking album at once is a slog, and
it is long.
I can't help but feel that way.
It's too long. You know, Anthony, I listened to this morning, and I went into it expecting that. Like I went into it like, damn, I got to set aside 90 minutes to listen straight through 200 Motels, which I'm the same way. I don't come back to this one very often, but I sort of had a change of heart about it today. I really, really like most of what's happening here. There are parts where it drags, without a doubt, but I love the orchestral side of it. Some of those big like hard rock songs like Magic Fingers, they really fucking punch.
Magic Fingers is highly underrated Frank song, actually. Like I wish totally it would have been released in some different setting than, I think it's like randomly like track 2, like side 4 track 2 or something. Like I kind of wish it would have been like on like a more palpable Zappa album, because I think it would have been a more successful song.
Yeah, that track hits hard, man. You could see that almost on like a Deep Purple album.
Yeah, it's
like
a
lyrics,
fucking awesome
lyrics
song.
aside, it's a fucking punchy hard rock tune. Yeah. But I think 200 Motels is extremely ambitious.
It's kind of rock opera, man.
Yeah, some of it definitely missed, but overall, I'm definitely a fan.
I'm rethinking our claim.
The orchestral stuff on this in particular is what I appreciate the most about it.
I've been rethinking our claim about rock opera, that it can only be done by Pete Townsend. I think there are other great examples of rock opera, but yeah.
I don't know if I probably wouldn't file this under rock opera.
It gets that tag frequently.
I don't even know what this is, honestly.
Yeah, it's bizarro world, man. I fucking 200 Motels is the weirdest thing.
Rock opera implies there's a story.
This might be the weirdest thing in his whole discography.
Yeah, I don't know. No, Thingfish is the weirdest thing in his whole discography.
Fair enough.
But
yeah,
Thingfish is rock opera, but it's not very good. But I love it. I have a good time listening to that album.
Yeah, you know, Frank always swung. He didn't always hit, but I respect him for always swinging. I respect self-indulgence as I think it's a virtue, kind of. So even when it doesn't work, which it didn't really work here, in my opinion, I respect it.
For what it's worth,
Jake, you got to go watch the movie.
I will, yeah.
Like, just to put it in context.
I'll probably fucking honestly, love it for some reason. I don't know.
It's kind of unwatchable, really.
Yeah, the movie is hard to get through. I'm going to be completely honest. It's hard to get through the whole thing, but
I'll probably love it.
It's worth it. It's worth it just for context, if nothing else.
Yeah. No, this is great. I liked it a lot. I feel like I had a great time listening to it. I didn't feel like it was a chore to get through. I played it back to back after I first listened to it, and that's when I figured out it was a soundtrack. And then I played it 2 more times since. So. I don't know if it'll be a regular rotation album. It is long, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was great. Quite good.
All right, well, let's cap this off with the last one for this round. Last one of the Flo and Eddie years before we're going to take a radical departure. So this is another live album, just another band from L.A. Pretty short record. I think it's only 5 tracks. One of them's pretty long. Billy the Mountain's like 20-some minutes long or something.
Album, yeah.
So Don Preston on the keyboards on this album is really good.
Oh yeah.
Everything else about this album,
Billy the Mountain in particular.
Everything else about this album, I actually think is like really bad. Like this would be bottom 5 in the discography probably for me. And probably, I don't know. Maybe Jim, you would. It wouldn't surprise me if you said the same, honestly.
I have a soft spot in my heart for just another band from LA. I loved this when I was first listening to Frank. Billy the Mountain in particular, which I listened to this again today, and it like there is tons of Billy the Mountain that just drags and drags and drags.
Oh, it's not good. It's not funny.
Where the part where they're just naming different places in the Los Angeles area, and Flo and Eddie are doing that. Yeah, exactly.
Oh man, that shit is not funny.
Damn it.
It's just fucking annoying.
It's pretty much just annoying. And if you like Frank, part of you has to appreciate that kind of annoyingness. Like, that's sort of the point. But I don't love this as much as I did when I was 16. That being said, like,
but like, what's like Billy the Mountain? What's he trying to say with it? I agree with your interpretation of like the demythologizing of the rock culture that occurs on a lot of these albums. What's he trying to say with Billy the Mountain? I've listened to it so many times. I don't get it. Like it's obviously trying to be funny. It's trying to be satirical. There are points.
Some of it is. Some of it is. I think, man. It sounds like you got a big filtered. Part of it is just having fun with this.
Okay, Jake,
stupid
you tell
idea
me what he's trying to say.
No, it ruins it. You got to figure it out for yourself. I know exactly what it's saying, but I can't share that. It's privileged information. You got to when you know, you know.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it is Frank having fun with the stupid idea, but he does that a lot better before and after this.
I agree, and this might just not have been the band for it. Because they were doing this comedy thing, whereas with the later bands, I think he just gets to be a little bit more subdued in the scope. Because Billy the Mountain is fucking 20 minutes too long.
And the original one, the one that was part of the Fillmore shows and shows up on Playground Psychotics, that one is like, it's at least 30 minutes. I think it might be like 32 minutes long.
It's been a while since I listened to Playground Psychotics. I have to go back and check that out again.
Playground Psychotics
that being said, though,
it's like an archival release of several different live shit from the Flo and Eddie period that came out in the 80s.
Yep.
For those who don't know.
Yeah, it came out much later. But I love this arrangement of Colony Vegetable. I love this arrangement of Dog Breath.
Dog Breath is definitely the best of the 5 tracks. Eddie, Are You Kidding? As I've mentioned, does not land. Magdalena is fine, but kind of forgettable.
I just thought it was musically less interesting, this album. Although when I listened to it again today, I liked it a little bit better. So there might be a trend there. I'm not sure.
That weird parody of Sweet Judy Blue Eyes that they do in Billy the Mountain. It's like you could say you're parodying Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, but not really. It's just Flo and Eddie doing the melody in an annoying way. Yeah. Like, does that mean parody? Not really. And it's like, what are you making fun of? Like, that's a good song. It's like Sweet Judy Blue Eyes is like a masterpiece of folk rock. It's like, what are you making fun of? Like, you're just doing you're just like, it's like repeat. It's like if you were to say something and then I repeated it back to you in this voice. It's like, would that count as parody? No, that's like just like kind of being annoying. And that's kind of like, and I don't know, like maybe just like the kind of like childishness of it is admirable to some degree, but I don't know, it wears on your patience pretty fast.
They're just horseplaying. That's how I look at it. I feel like they're just having fun, and like I don't know. I feel like it rubs off. It's like I'm like living,
but it's not
like, vicariously through that while I'm working. I feel like they're having fun, and it communicates, and like I don't know, like if I'm at a restaurant and I see a bunch of people fucking around and having a good time at another table, I look over and you see someone, you can share a laugh with them, even though you don't get the joke or know what's going on. You feel that, and that's just kind of how I feel like it's more innocent.
Yeah, but do I want an album of that? Not really.
I think Jake's right here. I think it's basically just like an innocuous, like, fun time. I don't think there's like any grand attempt at satire here. Like, they're just kind of having a good time. And I don't know. I don't think this is bottom 5, but it's definitely not my favorite.
I just thought it was musically less interesting, but yeah.
I mean, like, Billy the Mountain is something that I feel like could have been really good and really funny. Again, Jim, you speculated maybe it wasn't the right band for it. That might be part of it. Maybe it's just like, I don't know, like Gregory Peccary, which was kind of like his attempt to kind of do something similar again. Where Gregory Peccary, I wouldn't say is like one of his best pieces. Some people think it is.
I love Gregory Peccary.
I fucking adore Gregory Peccary.
I like Gregory
Joanna
Peccary
can sing
for
the
sure.
parts. I was singing that earlier, and she's doing the fills because she's heard it so many times now.
But Gregory Peccary is about 1,000
fucking
times
adore
better than
Gregory
Billy the
Peccary.
Mountain.
Gregory Peccary is much better than Billy the Mountain. Mind you, I think Gregory Peccary got recorded with the One Size Fits All band. That's not Flo and Eddie. I think he's going to end up with a lot more musician at his disposal than he's got during this era, right? Frank wrote music for the people that were playing in the band in a lot of ways. He structured the stuff he was writing so that his musicians could play it, and not only that, but so that their characteristics, their idiosyncrasies would fit those performances. They would fit those compositions, and it would bring the most out of them. So I think there's some of that happening here. Like he doesn't have a like George Duke's not on here playing keyboards. It's Don Preston. That's a big fucking difference. Just a big difference in terms of ability. He doesn't have a Steve Vai playing guitar. He doesn't have a Bobby Martin to do the vocal parts. He's got Flo and Eddie. He's got
Ian Underwood,
Ainsley Dunbar,
who's
who's
an
a good
musician.
Yes, he does have Ian Underwood, who's a rock star for sure. But he doesn't have Ruth Underwood. She's going to make a big difference. I think she showed up. She's on something here.
She played the xylophones and stuff.
Yeah, she's an auxiliary percussionist who plays marimba and timpani, stuff like that. She's on 200 Motels with George Duke, but they're not
That makes sense.
They're not on this. They're not on Fillmore East. He just doesn't have as much musician in his arsenal. I mean, that's might sound kind of harsh, but I think everybody in the band would probably agree. There's a different level. I mean, Frank ends up with a bunch of jazz musicians in the next band. He ends up with a bunch of jazz heavy hitters, hired guns who can really fucking rock, who can just burn through performances, through really hard performances. I mean, that's what separates the next era from the Flo and Eddie
You're
era.
getting like Sweet
This
Alfonso.
is more of like a hard rock band that Frank employed as a way to kind of warm up his comedy, because like Frank gets so much funnier than this shit. Like, dude, fucking like Shake Your Booty. I fucking just I howled with laughter at so much of that
Flakes
stuff.
is so fucking funny. Yeah,
dude, and
really
like
funny.
and Bobby Brown,
Bobby
Dancing
Brown,
Fool,
yeah.
Some of that stuff makes me laugh so fucking hard. And I think Frank just had to find his voice, man. It's hard to write funny music.
Wait a minute,
It's
you're an
really
Italian.
hard.
Yeah, so like sometimes like
Love your nails.
if I like shit on the humor on these albums, I feel like inevitably some people will be like, oh, he just doesn't think Frank Zappa's funny. I do think Frank Zappa's funny. I don't think these albums are funny though. It's not just me not getting Frank's humor. I think
It's a different style.
there are comics who could, like a comic who I think is funny could do a special that I don't think is funny, and that would be the best analogy for this.
Yeah,
There's stuff in here that's really funny, like where he's, I don't know, the parts where he's very vulgar, I think are funny, and they're kind of predictive of what we're gonna see with stuff like Shake Your Booty or Zappa New York, like, yeah. So like the groupie stuff I think is usually pretty funny. Like I love the do you like my new car, that bit on
there are funny moments on Fillmore
Dick is
East.
funny.
I don't think Billy the Mountain I think is not funny at all. I don't
Billy
really
the
think
Mountain, I
anything
think,
on
is
Just
pretty
Another Band
unfunny.
from LA is funny. I don't really think any of this album is funny.
It's not very intelligent humor, I don't think, but I don't always feel that it has to be. I just think when I hang out with my buddies and we're just being stupid, and it can be a good time. And that's just how I felt about it. It's kind of just innocent boys horsing around.
The stuff on Shake Your Beauty isn't all that highbrow either, but it's definitely funny. Again, my problem with it isn't that it's not highbrow enough.
Yeah, I mean, some of that stuff on Shake Your Booty is it's vulgar as hell.
Yeah, I've explained I think I've
Bobby
explained
Brown.
pretty. Humor is always going to be subjective, but I think I've explained pretty pretty precisely why I don't think a lot of this stuff is funny, so I won't repeat myself.
I think Frank is just still figuring out how to be funny, because what Frank is really good at is writing directly. That's what makes the stuff on Shake Your Booty so funny, I think, is because it's very direct. And you get glimpses of that. Like I said, with the groupie bits, you get glimpses of it where he's able to be pretty vulgar and just be very direct and blunt. You get some of that on 200 Motels. I think he's figuring out how to do it, man. Like it's not easy to be funny. And Frank, Frank's original genius is compositional. I think he comes into lyrics, I think.
He's funny on.
They improve.
He's funny on Freak Out.
Goes on. It's so different, though.
It is different. It's definitely not as.
It's not. It's not blunt. It's not blunt on Freak Out. The early Mother stuff is like more funny in its weirdness. It's funny in its bizarreness.
There's funny parody though, like a song like "I Ain't Got No Heart." Is funny. I think it's really funny. But I would agree in a different way than what he does later on. It's kind of darker, like the humor on Freak Out and Absolutely Free, like the "if she was my daughter," like that, like all that shit's funny, but it is darker, I'd say. It's interesting to trace how his humor evolves. And the idea that like the Flo and Eddie period was maybe just like warming up, or like just like trying out. I don't know. It's just like a lot of it. To kind of sum up, I feel like we've touched on this in several different ways talking about these albums. Is like a lot of it is Frank just like trying to try new stuff, which I respect, even if a lot of it doesn't quite land for me.
That's basically how I feel about this period. I think the Flo and Eddie band was a very, very unique band for Frank. He's basically got a hard rock group that he turns into a comedy performance, and that's kind of how they toured it. This is also very much a live group. I mean, shit. Two of the albums from the Flo and Eddie period are live albums. Much of 200 Motels is probably live studio takes. It's also a fucking movie soundtrack. So like there almost aren't there's not much just standard studio material from this band. I think a big component of it was that it was a live group, and Frank was basically playing with what he had available.
Yeah. It's interesting to speculate what would have happened if he wouldn't have gotten hurt.
Yeah, indeed. All right. Let's see. Are we going to rank these? If so, are we going to include the first episode or no?
That's too many to try to rank.
If we could probably do it this time, it might take a second, but we got to recognize if we're going to do all of these episodes, then we're going to have to rank like 100 of them, and that's just not good TV. So I don't think we should.
Yeah, I agree.
Maybe at the end we can pick like a topper or something like that. That'd be my pick. I'd be happy to do it, but I think it would get really boring after a while.
It would be kind of fun to try to pull out like a full worst to best of all 55 or whatever at the end. But for now, let's just.
I am tracking that.
Yeah, I am too.
I am tracking that on my end, so we'll see when we get to the end.
But each of us listing 55 things that's not fun for anybody. So I don't think we should do
exactly.
it.
Maybe we can each pick like a top 15 of the whole thing when we get to the end.
At the very end.
Do something like that.
Yeah.
But that's the Flo and Eddie years. The Flo and Eddie years and the first post Mothers years. So I think for tonight everyone's favorite's probably Hot Rats. Am I right?
Yeah.
Spoiler.
Yeah, I think everyone's favorite's Hot Rats, and it's the obvious best from this.
We can rank these though. We should rank these individually for the episode.
Yeah.
I think.
We can rank the.
Okay.
Is it 7 albums that we talked about?
Yeah, it's 7 albums.
Yeah, we should rank each episode. Like at least have the perspective of the era. What we liked.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Let's do that then.
I can go first.
Who wants to go first? Yeah, do it.
Yeah, so 7-1. It's 7-1. It's Burnt Weenie Sandwich. Just Another Band from LA. Weasels. Fillmore. 200 Motels. Chunga's. Hot Rats.
Chungus.
Yeah, Chungus' Revenge.
All right, Jim.
Okay, let's do this. 7-1. Just Another Band. Fillmore East. Chunga's. This is where it gets tough. Burnt Weenie Sandwich, 200 Motels, Weasels, and Hot Rats.
This is actually extremely easy for me, this particular ranking. 7-1, Just Another Band, 200 Motels, Fillmore, Chunga's, Burnt Weenie Sandwich, Weasels, Hot Rats. It's a really, really easy ranking, actually.
Mine was relatively easy as well.
Yeah, my trouble was 200 Motels and
I couldn't decide if I liked 200 Motels or Fillmore better. Those are pretty close.
All right, well, there you have it. That's episode 2 of our Frank Zappa deep dive. Yeah, next up is probably going to be the most fun batch of this whole thing. Probably the next 2 episodes. So stick around. There's still a fucking hell of a whole lot of Frank Zappa for us to get through here.
Yeah, like it almost, in some ways, it almost starts after this, and we've already talked about like 12 albums.
Yeah, almost. Oh, and one other thing before we go, I did find that jazz documentary series that I was referring to earlier. It was a BBC series from 2003. It's called Jazz from Hell: His Bizarre Relationship with Jazz. That's on YouTube if anybody's interested.
It's a series?
It was a 3-part series. I'll send you guys the link, and maybe we'll put it in the
it's all about Frank?
description there. Yeah.
That sounds awesome.
It's like an hour and a half. It's not very long. I'm putting it in our Discord now, and we'll go ahead and put that in the description when we throw this episode up on YouTube and whatnot.
Cool.
Alrighty. Until next time.
Peace.